watched it open. I went in and I.
Okay, if we're ready.
Well, if you stand up and push that lever, the
One seat,
seat
one
comes
seat.
up. I think this one,
This is when I need a gavel.
Paid my way to school.
there you go.
Call to order. March 2023 Rail Committee, Atherton Rail Committee meeting. Can we get a roll call, please?
Chair Key,
Here.
Vice Chair Molbeck,
Here,
Jack Ringham,
Here.
Greg Conlon,
here,
Jim Jans,
Here.
Jim Massey.
Here.
Okay. And our council member liaison is not here.
Okay. Before we proceed, I was wondering if we could have a moment of silence for our departed member, Paul Jones. He's our past chair and thought we should at least acknowledge that.
Wait a minute, you want to say that clearly?
Oh, I just wanted to have a moment of silence for Paul.
He passed?
He passed, yeah.
Well, Jack's wife passed too.
Oh, really? Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Jack.
Today?
Yesterday.
Yesterday.
Oh,
Oh, sorry, Jack.
Right, here's Jack. Wow.
so if we'll just take a few seconds. Okay.
You can sit up there or you can sit down here wherever you feel more comfortable.
Can you handle all these men? Can you handle all these men?
Oh.
take that, Greg.
Okay. Well, we'll have the record reflect that our alternate liaison, Councilmember Miles Holland is present.
Just in time for public comments.
So we're just actually finishing up a moment of silence, recognizing the passing of one of the members of the committee.
Yeah, our longtime chair, Paul Jones. No, it's okay.
Do you have any information on his service for Paul?
Do you have any?
No, I'm asking.
Oh, I don't know.
I haven't seen any.
I understand it's the 25th of March in San Mateo at a church.
Really? Thank you.
Public comments. Are there any public comments online?
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, why don't we move to the approval of minutes? Any other comments? Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstained?
Okay, can I ask who made the motion?
Right over here, and then Greg over there.
Okay, so Jim.
Jim, then Greg. Yeah. Let's move on to our presentations and thank you. Thank you to the,
Looks like we have a hand raised.
Okay.
Adrian. Why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to let people on the committee and people tuned in remotely that there will be a Quiet Zone community meeting in Menlo Park this month on March 23rd in the Arriaga, what's the exact, the 6 p.m. I think it's the Arriaga meeting room, 701 Laurel. That Menlo Park is doing together with Palo Alto a train horn quiet zone study covering all the Menlo Park crossings, and Palo Alto has joined in because residents there near the Alma Palo Alto Avenue crossing, which is just across the creek from Menlo Park, would also like to be included, and the city is working cooperatively with Menlo Park. And so there'll be a community meeting just updating interested parties on how that study's going and so forth, a Q&A. So I just thought people might want to know. Thanks.
thank you.
You want to explain who Ripon is?
As soon as I introduce the next item, yeah. So the next item is the Palo Alto and I think AECOM will be presenting on their plans for their rail future and their rail crossings. Was there anything else you want to say, Greg, on that?
Well, and the consultant.
Yeah, AECom, yeah.
What is Acon is the name of the company,
Yeah, that's the consulting company.
and her name is
Um,
Fayette.
Burnett, Millet, Litzinger.
What is it, Fayette?
Millet.
Mullet. And the Acon is a consulting firm that's helping both Palo Alto and Menlo Park
And I believe Redwood City as well, yeah.
and Redwood City.
Yes.
So everybody but us, so we feel left out, so we ask her to see if she can let us know what she's doing.
So Millet and Ripon, you guys can have the floor. Thank you for joining us and taking the time to present to us.
Yeah, I can introduce a little bit. Good evening, Honorable Chair, members of the Rail Committee, Ripon Bhatia with the Office of Transportation at City of Palo Alto. First of all, I'd like to, say thank you to Greg, who has introduced us to this committee, but also sharing this information with our community as well as our neighbors and having a joint, understanding of how these projects, these mega projects are important to the community, and we can learn from each other. So this is a session where we can share City of Palo Alto's efforts in the design and the conceptual design efforts for the various alternatives. And AECom is our consultant supporting this review of the alternatives as we move with the community in refinements and working towards the selection of the preferred alternatives. So today we have Millet Litzinger from AECom and Peter DiStefano also from AECom, who are helping us as a primary contact in this effort. So without further ado, Millet, you can introduce and continue. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ripon. Yeah, my name is Millet Litzinger. I'm a senior project manager for AECom. And as you mentioned, we've been working on several projects, grade separation planning studies along the corridor. And joining me tonight is Peter DiStefano, also from AECom, and he's a senior project engineer. So we're glad to be here tonight to tell you about what we've been working on. We are going to be focusing on Meadow Drive and Charleston Road alternatives that Palo Alto is looking at. And there was a request that we focus in on the trench, the hybrid, and the underpass. And I'll explain what a hybrid is as part of the presentation. And then we'll close with Ripon's going to do a next steps of what the city's planning, and then we'll do some Q&A. If you guys have questions, we'd like to answer them. So moving on then. So this first alternative that we're looking at is what's called the Meadow Drive and Charleston Road Trench. And here we have a plan and profile, and north is to the left. So you can see Meadow is a little bit to the left of center, and then Charleston Road. And in this alternative, the railroad will be lowered in a U-shaped box below both Meadow Drive and Charleston Road. The lowering will begin south of Loma Verde Avenue and will remain lowered under Meadow Drive and Charleston Road, and it returns back to grade at the San Antonio station. The railroad will be approximately 30 feet below both Meadow Drive and Charleston Road. And the lowering of the roadway will require diversion of Adobe and Barron Creeks, requiring lift stations or siphons, and there are numerous regulatory agency permits and approvals that would be required to implement this. This slide here is a typical section of the trench. The permanent tracks will be in the trench, and that's the U-shaped trench I was referring to. And during construction, a temporary track will be needed to provide Caltrain service during construction. So the temporary shoe fly you're seeing on the right side of the typical section. The trench retaining walls The trench retaining wall, the U-shaped trench, will require ground anchors, and those are those diagonal lines that extend out from the wall. Meadow Drive and Charleston Road will remain at their existing grade on a bridge over the railroad. Because of the ground, and you can see that in the rendering that's on the right side of the page. And because of those ground anchors for the retaining walls, the landscaping modeled in this area depicts plants with shallow roots because we couldn't put trees in that area because of those ground anchors. The order of magnitude cost for the trench is $100 to $950 million, and that's in 2025 dollars. I think the next slide, this is the same rendering looking south towards Meadow Drive, but it's just a little larger scale, so you can see it in a little more detail.
Did you say 950 million? Was that?
Yes, that was the high end
Okay,
of our range of costs. Yes.
okay, thank you.
And let's see, let's move on then to the hybrid. And hybrid is a term that we use to indicate when a railroad is partially raised and the roadway is partially lowered. The railroad tracks will be approximately 15 feet above Meadow and Charleston. Meadow and Charleston will be lowered about 6 feet. The railroad here will begin rising near El Verano Avenue. It will remain raised over Meadow and Charleston and return to the existing track elevation north of Verney Avenue.
Will the high-speed rail be compatible with that? Raising it?
Yes. I mean, it can, high-speed rail can go on an elevated structure as well as a one that's lowered. This next slide here is a plan view of what would be specifically happening at Meadow Drive. In the interest of keeping our presentation short tonight, I'm just talking about what happens at Meadow. There would be similar impacts at Charleston, but I'm focusing on Meadow as part of this discussion. So in this exhibit, Meadow is up and down on this exhibit, and the purple indicates the areas where the streets will be lowered. Meadow will be lowered roughly between Park Boulevard and east of Alma Street. And Alma Street will also need to be lowered. The impacts outlined for Meadow Drive are very similar for Charleston Road. The lowering of both Meadow and Charleston is approximately 6 feet. I think we'll move on then to the section drawing and the rendering. This is again a sample cross section between Meadow and Charleston looking north. The track is slightly elevated, and we show the temporary track required to provide Caltrain service during construction. In the rendering on the right side, the tracks you can see are partially elevated and the roadway is partially lowered. This rendering, this is the rendering of actually Charleston Road, and it illustrates the retaining wall to elevate the railroad and lower Charleston as well as Alma. Both would have to be lowered to some extent to get underneath the railroad tracks.
Is it very similar to Fifth Avenue in Redwood City?
Fifth Avenue in Redwood City.
Yeah, it would be somewhat similar. Fifth Avenue, I think, is a fully lowered road, so it'd be similar, but not quite the same.
Yeah, maybe a better example of it might be in San Carlos. Some of those up at
Holly.
Holly Street,
Yeah.
probably more similar.
I don't understand where the shoe flies would go in any of these. Is there room for shoe fly tracks?
Yes. I mean, we have to, I guess in this case, putting it on one side of the other of where it exists today, so we can build the new tracks near where they are now.
Yeah, it would take up a portion of Alma Street.
Mhm.
Have you made a choice yet?
No, the city has still not chosen an alternative for Meadow in Charleston yet.
It's a
They've
choice.
eliminated a few, but they haven't come down to the. Ripon can say more about that if he chooses.
Correct. In the last slide, I will let you know about the next steps that we are working on, or the current steps that we are working on, so we can summarize it. But like Millet is explaining all the different alternatives that are in consideration and are of interest to applicant. So we can answer those questions as we move along. Yes.
All right, and then I think the next slide that's coming up. All right,
You
this
wanna ask
is.
a question, ask them.
uh,
You wanna ask
sure.
them? No, okay. No, go
Sure.
ahead, Millet, go ahead.
So this is a plan view of the underpass. In this alternative, the tracks, although, did I mention the cost on the previous slide? I did, didn't I?
No, not
Not
the,
for hybrid.
not with the.
Not for
raised-
hybrid, okay. All right, so the hybrid costs on the previous slide, we were showing that as 190 to 230 million in 2025 dollars.
Is that per crossing or is that in aggregate?
It's an aggregate.
Now, wait, what's the 950?
That was the trench. That was the.
That's a trench.
Yeah, that was the trench.
At each of the intersections?
Not
Or
together.
are both?
No, we considered them together because you couldn't do one without the other because they're so closely spaced.
And that's a 950.
Yeah, the trench was 950.
And the hybrid is only 190?
Yeah, 190 to 230. 190 to 230,
To 200,
230,
to what?
230.
230.
Yeah.
Well, it's substantially different.
Yeah, the trench is quite expensive. Yeah, so I'll move on to the last alternative that we were going to go through, which is the Meadow Drive underpass. In this alternative, the tracks in Alma Street remain at their existing elevation while Meadow is lowered just west of Park Boulevard to Emerson while passing under the tracks and Alma. There's a separated 20-foot wide two-way ped bike path located on the south side of Meadow in this alternative, and that is shown in pink on this alternative. And similar to the other ones, the purple area indicates the area of where the roadway is being modified. The bike path passes under the tracks in Alma, and there's crosswalks on Meadow. Crosswalks on Meadow are provided at Second and Emerson. So there's some turning movements because of some geometry restrictions that won't be allowed during with this alternative. Vehicles on Meadow will not be able to access southbound Alma. And northbound vehicles on Alma can access Meadow, but they will have to travel about 600 feet north of Meadow to Alma Village Circle to make a U-turn, then travel back south to make a left or right turn onto Meadow at the signalized T intersection in the underpass. Due to the proximity of Alma to the railroad, the U-turn radius is relatively tight and trucks would be prohibited from this movement. And lastly, on the south side of Meadow, Park Boulevard will no longer have a direct connection with Meadow. To help provide bike ped connectivity, pedestrian bridges are proposed over Meadow on each side of the tracks, and those structures are shown in brown as you see them crossing Meadow Drive.
What is the distance between Meadow and Charleston?
Do you know that, Peter?
It's about 2,000 feet roughly.
2,000 what?
I think it's a little less than a half mile, if I'm not mistaken. Ripon, I don't know if you know that number.
I don't know. I was gonna measure it off Google.
What is our distance between Watkins and Fair Oaks? About a half mile,
No, it's less than that.
less than that? Okay. I was thinking that would be about the same, but you're saying it's actually less.
Yeah, and we have an exhibit we can show at the end that does, it's just a Google map and a profile of Atherton's area. If we want to look at that, we can look at what the distance is in that exhibit. I think let's move on then to the rendering here on the next slide. The image on the left is looking north along Alma towards Meadow. You can see the ramp connection from southbound Alma to Meadow. It's shown on the left side of Alma, and the ramp connection from Meadow to northbound Alma is shown on the right. The image on the right is looking west along Meadow. The separated bike path can be seen on the left behind the railing, and the right turn onto northbound Alma can be seen on the right side of this rendering. The order of magnitude cost for the underpass is $340 to $420 million and $225. And
That's
then I
different
think,
than the trench?
pardon me?
That's a different cost than the trench?
Yes, they all have different costs. Each alternative, trench, hybrid, and the underpass are all different costs.
And is this that underpass quote just for Meadow, or is that for the two of them?
It's for the two of them,
Okay.
The cost is for both or individually?
for both. And then this is an image, an aerial view of the 3D model looking to the southeast. Park Boulevard is in the lower right, and the Emerson Street intersection is in the upper left. Okay. I think I'll pass it to Ripon then.
So finally, so right now, the status is that we are have narrowed down these alternatives to 3 alternatives in consideration for Meadow and Charleston, and that's hybrid, trench, and underpass alternatives. And our stakeholders, including our pedestrian and bike advisory committee, as well as school district and other stakeholders, have recommended us to look into some refinements and address some of these issues that they brought up to us. And so we are conducting some additional studies and refinements of the alternatives at this time, which would help rail committee and in narrowing and further those alternatives for the selection of the preferred alternatives. So currently we are doing some additional geotechnical studies, some additional cost estimation, as well as some refinement of the alternatives to address bike and pedestrian moments and other concerns that were brought up during from our stakeholders. So and we bring forward these items to our rail committee for their directions and seek their guidance in making those modifications. And we are hoping that in the next few months we would be able to get what we have discussed to date and for some kind of decision making at from the rail committee and select the preferred alternative in our next step. So that's what our next step is. Once we have the preferred alternative selection, we would dive down more into the engineering or design of that preferred alternative in a preliminary engineering format, and then also get into the more detailed design as well as the environmental documentation. So that's the following steps, but we are hoping to get these refinements that would help rail committee in narrowing down and selection of the preferred alternative. We certainly have a preferred alternative selected for Churchill Avenue, which is partial underpass alternative at this time. With however, council has also selected the closure as a backup alternative, since it has to go through some additional reviews. And so we would, we are working through that as we refine these alternatives. So noting those, that is the current status, and some of those questions, that came up during the discussion. So hopefully that I answered that. But if next slide, please. We are open to any questions, and we can refer back to those slides as needed, for your question and answering those questions. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ruben and Millet and Peter.
We have a member of the public
Yeah.
that had a question.
Can I open it up for committee questions first, and then I'll take questions and comments from the public. So does the committee have any questions?
Churchill, what is, I don't understand. Is that the underpass methodology for Churchill?
Yeah, you want to explain, Ripon, which alternative we're looking at, and you kind of have a preferred and a backup, right?
Correct. So as I mentioned before, Churchill Avenue is a different crossing. So we were focusing today on Meadow and Charleston to give you an overview of what these different alternatives are. But we do have a selected preferred alternative for Churchill Avenue, which is partial underpass, which is a variation of the underpass. I don't want to get into a little bit more complexities, but we can certainly discuss that because of the challenging situation of Churchill Avenue. There was some additional, that was considered a little differently for Churchill Avenue, but it's same concepts as that of the underpass alternatives. But the only thing is that the through moments don't go through on Churchill. So little deviation, but we do have a preferred alternative selection for that, Churchill Avenue.
My recollection is on when we were looking at Atherton, that we would come down from Redwood City with a slope of 1.5%. Now, yours must be greater than that, isn't it? For your underpass?
Yes, the underpass, maybe Millet and Peter can chime in. The roadway grade profile is at 10 to 12%, and the pedestrian and bike pathway is left at 5%. So there are two different variation of the slopes that we have, one for pedestrians, one for vehicular, and the vehicular ranges from 10 to 12%.
Yeah, I think the question was more related to the railroad grade. Is that what you were
Okay.
asking?
It's the railroad grade you're referring to, right? Not the sidewalk and. street.
Yeah, I mean,
Right, the railroad.
Caltrain,
Yeah, that's right, railroad grade.
yeah. So Caltrain's minimum or maximum allowed grade is 1%. So that is what we generally try to follow.
Though the trench looks like it's 2%.
Yes, it would require a design exception. We want to go back to that. Thanks, Peter.
And that's assuming 210 miles an hour, no, 110 miles an hour in up the peninsula. The high-speed rail.
I think it might be more the freight that might have the problem with the 2% grade.
Yes, it is generally that. So yes, that we would have to, that's one of the, many design criteria that we've identified that are differentiators between the alternatives. And for the trench, they would have to request an exception to the 2% grade, which could be challenging. There's not, you do have to show a significant hardship in order for it to be, for Caltrain to consider it. And it does take a while. So that's a challenge of this alternative. Maybe some people, we would view that as a con, or it's a challenge you would have to overcome to get this alternative approved.
But it's all 110 miles is the maximum speed.
That is-
Yeah, yes.
Go ahead,
That's
Peter.
correct. Yeah, the high-speed rail is designed for 110, that's correct.
Do you have any estimates of the duration of the construction projects to implement these three alternatives?
Yes, we did have, and I don't have those at my fingertips, but we do have some really nice fact sheets for each of these alternatives that are on the Connecting Palo Alto website. And it lists the approximate duration of construction for each of them. They are in the neighborhood of, 1 to 3 years, I think, depending on the alternative.
Yeah, I think some of them are even more than that, Millet. We'll have to go
Okay.
back and look, but yeah.
And I believe trench is 6 years.
6, yeah, I know trench is the longest for sure. it's a very complicated alternative.
Which one would be 1 year? I mean, that's really,
Yeah, and I may have, the range was, maybe it's more like 2 to 6 years, but speaking from memory.
I mean, we've seen it take a year to put a quad gate in at Fair Oaks Lane.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you
Like-
consider
like-
the quad gates as an alternative?
No, they did not consider quad gates, but they did consider closure at Churchill.
So quad gates are require actually mitigation measure for high-speed rail that has been identified by high-speed rail environmental impact report. So there is a consideration of quad gates in the interim scenarios if it's needed, but a long-term solution requires a grade separation because the traffic impacts and the other impacts that we would be in having. So generally grade separation is considered a long-term permanent solution, and quad gate might be an interim solution.
Is the underground a viable alternative still in the race?
Underground means underpass.
The U shape, what do you,
The trench.
the trench,
Yeah.
is that still in the running?
It is yet still in the running, though it is an expensive option. So we are going through that kind of review with the rail committee, and until rail committee makes that recommendations, we will continue that for consideration.
And the sales tax from the Santa Clara County is funding this?
That's one of the source for funds that we have available, but it will not certainly fund the entire, because the Santa Clara County maybe sales tax fund provides for the grade separation for all 8 crossings in Santa Clara County, and 4 of those are in Palo Alto. So yes, there will be a portion of funding from that measure be Santa Clara sales tax.
It's 800 million between the total?
It was 700 million in 2016 dollars. And about half of that will come to Palo Alto.
Over the, I think 30 years, the tax is going to collect.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it would, the numbers would be, depending upon the actual collection will be varying. So as we move forward with the planning, we will keep, looking at that.
Well, we never have quantified the sales tax revenues that Atherton should be getting from Proposition A. Our friend Malcolm, what did he argue? 500 million or 500,000 a year?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like
Yeah.
that, but we ought to not lose track of that. Because, you take 10 years, you're talking 5 million.
Yeah. Ripon, what is there any decisions for Palo Alto Avenue in terms of grade separating that, or is it still kind of waiting until the Palo Alto Council just considers what to do around downtown?
So currently the project is on hold for different reasons. I mean, including one of them being downtown, coordinated area plan. So at this time, that project is on hold.
Okay.
Can Millette mention the Menlo Park crossings, or were you planning on doing that, Millette?
Well, I was planning on doing that.
Oh,
but-
you were
but-
doing-
But Peter probably is better because I think Peter is the consultant at AECOM for Menlo Park's rails plans. But I'm not sure if it's fair to ask Peter to present that since we didn't prepare him for it. But I can give a summary of it if
All right,
Peter's willing to stay around, although I'll move that item to the next one. Why don't we move to the public comment, because I think we're done with the questions. So Mr. Brandt, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I do. I just wanted to make some comments. High Speed Rail Authority is planning to, has announced they're going to do quad gates on all 70 crossings between Gilroy and San Francisco. So, and as you and Atherton know, that's a prerequisite often for doing a quiet zone anyway. High Speed Rail Authority is supportive of doing quiet zones, but that's up to each individual jurisdiction to take initiative and carry that process through, as I believe you also all know. The other comment I would make about these grade separations in general is that dipping or lowering roads is, I think, really folly. It's enormously disruptive, and you've got massive utility relocations, and every project, even the one recently completed in San Mateo where they've done it, they've run into major delays with utilities and coordination with PG&E, major cost overruns. So it's something really to be avoided. And the other reason to really avoid it is that with the recent storms that are increasing in intensity and are predicted to further increase over the years due to atmospheric rivers, these lowered crossings flood, and they need to be equipped with permanent, fail-safe, power backed up pumping systems to avoid flooding. And even though they still flood because these things break down, and whatever happens, they get overwhelmed. So far in the last few years, 3 people have died at Caltrain grade crossings that were grade separated and flooded. And so this is really something that needs to be considered. They talk about doing safety. These floods are deadly because people are not able to discern that it's too deep to drive through at night. They drive in and get in trouble. So the other thing I would point out is in the presentation, Ms. Litzinger pointed out that the road in the hybrid option in Palo Alto is only being lowered 6 feet. And what I would highlight is that, to me, it's almost insane, but as a SOF to people who are rabidly allergic to the term viaduct or elevating the tracks, for 6 more feet of track elevation, they can avoid all those impacts that were in that presentation. All the purple lowering of streets, the private property takings, the driveways that are cut off, the circulation, the bike circulation. I mean, it's awful. They could do all of that by just going 6 feet up higher, but because of a very small handful of people that are very loud in Palo Alto, they got that alternative taken off the table. So now they're spending, the amount of impact is enormous to do a hybrid, and they're spending an enormous amount of money and effort to do that when, and they're even looking at the trench, which is $700 million more than hybrid, and many $100 million more than going fully elevated. So there's some weird psychology going on there. And in terms of the delays at the grade crossings, it's important to remember that there's a double standard. Grade crossings, they talk about the gate downtime. That gate downtime, even with increased service, will never come close to the amount of red light time at any standard complex intersection. There's way more red time in the day, or however you want to measure it, but motorists have a double standard in their minds, and waiting for 1,000 people or several hundred on the train to go whizzing by in an emission-free train is somehow, their hair's on fire and you got to grade separate. So, I think it's important to maintain some perspective, but I would really urge some sanity on Palo Alto and consider going 6 feet higher with the tracks and avoiding all those horrible impacts. I mean, they're just awful. I mean, you got Caltrans type underpasses there. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brandt. Are there other comments from members of the public?
We don't have anybody else online.
Okay. So are there any comments from the committee?
Well, you're going to cover the Menlo next.
Yeah, I'll move up the agenda item to talk about Menlo, and if Peter wants to stick around and correct anything I've misspoken, he's welcome to. So if there's no other comments, I'll move on. I'll move item, forget which item number it is, but the one on neighboring jurisdictions and what they're doing. So Menlo.
If I might interject, Chair, I want to say thank you to Millette Litzinger, Peter DeStefano, and Ripon Badia for joining us tonight and making the presentation.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Greg, for helping to arrange this, as well as.
I really appreciate you
Robert.
guys doing that. It's above and beyond.
Yeah, we're glad to be here. So thank you so much. I will just hang along with Peter for a few more minutes to hear Menlo Park, and then, yeah, but thank you.
Yeah, and thank you. And hopefully that was helpful. Thanks.
It was. Thank you, Ripon. Appreciate it. Yes. Neighboring jurisdictions, Menlo Park, on February 28th, they had a meeting to decide if they want to proceed with their original alternative C. at that, which was a kind of a hybrid option. As you saw, Palo Alto has a hybrid option, which is raising the tracks and lowering the road. So the tracks would be about 10 feet above certain, the road level now. And then the road would dip underneath that to give enough clearance for cars and trucks to go under. The estimate for that was in 2019, 390 million. But staff asked them to consider an alternative with their consultant, also AECom, to consider making that grade without changing the roadway bed. So the road would be flat. As Adrian was suggesting, keep the road where it is, just move the rails completely up. So rails would be up 20 feet instead of 10 feet.
How
And
much?
20 feet.
Elevated 20 feet,
Yes, that's correct. 20 feet instead of 10 feet.
right through Menlo all the way?
Most of Menlo, yes. They provided alternatives to get back down to the grade level by the time they hit Atherton. They've also modeled what it would be like if they didn't get back to grade level in Atherton, just in case, the council wanted to consider that. So they had about 5 alternatives to consider.
But they would probably prefer us staying at 20 feet.
Well, it turns out that a lot of people objected to the 20 feet because it's a 10-foot wall versus a 20-foot wall through their town, and there's residential next to a lot of the northern parts of Menlo Park, and so people in those residential areas generally would object. Although I'm not sure if they provided public comment at that meeting, but in the past, their council has heard, if you build a wall there, it's going to kind of build a split between the city, and also now you really hear the noise of the rail as it passes by because it's 10 feet higher and it spreads around.
Well, if the consulting firm is working with both Menlo and Redwood City, what is their assumption on Atherton?
Well, so they went through a few models, and a couple of the models did raise a little bit of the elevation in Atherton, and another one raised a lot, depending on what Menlo Park wanted to proceed with, because they just said, okay, we could grade separate all your crossings, but to grade separate, say, Encino, you would have to build higher up into Atherton because you can't get back to ground level or grade level by the time you get to Atherton because of the limit of 1%, what freight and Caltrain will allow, 2% if you can convince them, so which can be hard just to keep one roadway. So they went through those scenarios, and Peter was the consultant on that, if he's still on there.
Yep, I'm still here.
Oh, yeah, he's still there. And the actual cost, I think, was undetermined in terms of which is more and which is less, because even though you might save ripping up the road in which you build a hybrid, it's gonna cost more the higher you lift the rail up. At least that's what I understood from his presentation and staff's presentation. But it would reduce the flooding risk. It would reduce the closure of the roads because now you don't have to close the roads, maybe not as long, because you don't have to change their grade at all. So that's kind of the benefits of having that. But ultimately, their council decided that they would stay with alternative C, the hybrid. It was ultimately unanimous, although they were kind of like thinking maybe we'll do one of the fully raised options, but they decided to go with hybrid because it's well studied, and they felt like they were talking about this a long time because they had decided on this alternative back in 2019, and they're still talking about possible alternatives. So they said, if we keep talking and talking, we'll never get it done. And they talked about, well, hopefully our grandchildren will be able to use this type of thing. The other thing that came out of it I thought was important was the people who were okay with hybrid wanted an open structure, a viaduct structure, in which instead of having a wall like you see in San Carlos, it's an open area. But it turns out having that type of viaduct is expensive. So while they could, that will be problematic when they try to get funding in terms of, how can we pay for a viaduct? Maybe they'll say we could get parts of the structure to be open, and then maybe other ones will build a wall, so it'll save on price. So value engineer it. So that's kind of their consideration. They would like to have a viaduct so that they don't have this plain wall, but they'll see what it comes out in when they do a further study. So they will proceed to study alternative C. Their next checkpoint will be the annual budget process they'll have in the spring of this year. And the part where they do the study is paid for by the TA. And once they come down with the plans, then they have to find the payment for the full cost, which was about 400 million as estimated a few years ago.
Are they gonna ask Atherton to consider something?
No, they nixed all the alternatives that would affect Atherton, so it's not, they're not planning to, at least I don't think their staff is gonna ask Robert about it. Robert, you haven't been contacted, right, from Menlo Park? Yeah.
I would say thus far, the town hasn't been contacted with regards to any impacts in the town. As the chair mentioned, it looks like the direction that they're heading is one that will not cross into the town's jurisdiction with their ultimate configuration. That's not to say that there won't be some adjustments within the right of way for some sort of shoe fly or other actions that are necessary to keep the rail operating.
Yeah, this is Peter from AECOM. That's a correct assessment for their preferred alternative C. They're touching down back to grade right around Encinal. So there might be a slight shift of the tracks for the shoe fly near Atherton Channel, but there'll be no raise of the tracks within Atherton.
And thank you, Peter. Any questions from the committee?
To what extent are these decisions being driven by high-speed rail? If high-speed rail were to die tomorrow, would people be considering all of this stuff to accommodate Caltrain by itself?
That's hard to assess.
Well, I'm
Maybe.
going to indicate that there are a lot of jurisdictions that have been looking towards grade separations to address Caltrain on its own. There are safety issues, traffic impacts that are forecasted with regards to the desired level of service down the line, regardless of whether or not high-speed rail happens.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I'll open up for public comment. Mr. Brandt?
Yes, thank you again. Yeah, that was a more or less correct summary of what happened in Menlo Park. I did follow that pretty closely. One major mistake that the council's decision was somewhat predicated on, Mayor Wallison and others, but she in particular stated that used Burlingame's Broadway. It's not funded yet, but it's fully designed. Proposed Broadway grade separation. And the drawings for that are available on the city website. They're quite extensive. But she spoke of how they value engineered it. And, Burlingame, to paraphrase her, cares about things looking nice. And she spoke with Council Member Beach and said that if it's okay for Burlingame, then surely it'll be okay for Menlo Park, and we'll figure out a way to make hybrid look and work function, well for us. And the big problem with that is that she was wrong. Burlingame actually took over a year to value engineer that design, and wound up solving a lot of problems and reducing the cost by elevating the tracks further, so that Broadway did not have to be lowered at all in all the surrounding streets. So they got rid of that impact and made the project better. And it seems like Menlo Park didn't pick up on that. And if they do follow in Burlingame's footsteps, they're gonna first design a hybrid and then realize it's kind of crappy, and go back and spend another year value engineering it and wind up doing the same thing Burlingame did. Obviously, that's silly. So I think I'm hopeful that the council will reconsider and rethink that decision. The comment that I believe was the chair made about doing a viaduct across the downtown, that only works if the tracks are elevated sufficiently. There's absolutely no reason, it's a waste of money to put a partially raised track on a viaduct, because then you've got a cramped, dark space and it's not usable for anything whatsoever. In Melbourne, Australia, they've done a magnificent job. There's a big project there where they're doing dozens of grade separations, and they fully elevate the tracks. It's very comparable to Caltrain with freight occasionally. And they've created new usable community space all around the stations and underneath the tracks because the viaduct is fully open underneath and elevated. So you get something for your extra money. And of course, it would only be in downtown and be to the north in Felton Gables, where it's sloping back down into Atherton. That, of course, is well screened by trees and foliage. And it really wouldn't make that much difference to the residents. They're, again, like in Palo Alto, driving the whole discussion based on fear of the term viaduct. And, I will just close by noting that AECOM for Palo Alto did a 42-page noise and vibration study at request of the people that were afraid of viaducts in Palo Alto. And viaducts came out very good. The noise levels and vibrations were comparable or even less in some cases. It's counterintuitive, I know, but please look up. It's on the Connecting Palo Alto website, along with YouTube videos of the staging of the different alternatives. But that noise study is there. It's a 42-page PDF, and it's very detailed, very compelling. It makes sense. So there's just a lot of misinformation driving decisions, and it's very unfortunate.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks.
Brain.
Okay, any other comments from the committee or from liaison? No? Okay, why don't we move on to, thank you, Mr. Stefano, and Ms. Litzinger, if you guys are still on, if you're welcome to continue staying on if you'd like. We're going to move on to some Atherton specific stuff now. I guess item 3, Atherton Caltrain station remodel update.
Great. Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. The project to redesign to rehabilitate and remodel the Atherton Station building is out for bid. We have a bid opening date scheduled for the 15th of this month. And so we're hopeful that we'll get a couple bids on that.
Okay. Any questions or comments?
Well, I haven't made a comment, but I don't know if this is the time on the agenda about reopening the station.
Well, I think that's not currently on the agenda for today, but it is something that we can discuss as a future agenda item later on the agenda.
And the reason I suggested is that the airlines are struggling to survive. They're short 10,000 pilots, and the traffic for trains is going to increase, as no other because it's the only alternative. So it's, we can talk about it next meeting.
Yeah, it's
There's
not
no
on the
rush.
agenda.
Okay. Any public comment on on the Atherton Caltrain station remodel? If not, why don't we move on to item number 4, Watkins Avenue safety improvements.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. As you know, Caltrain awarded construction contract to Granite Rock Construction for the the construction of the Watkins safety improvements, which includes the installation of quad gates at the crossing. Though physical construction hasn't started, there have been coordination meetings, draft schedule provided to Caltrain for the implementation. As it is a draft, we haven't seen it yet, but once we get it, we'll be happy to share. They've made submittals to Caltrain for items that need to be purchased, and that includes a couple of items for us to review, such as streetlights that'll be put in at the pedestrian crossing. And so we've reviewed that, provided feedback to Caltrain. There are a couple other items that we need to look at, but one of the main items that we're worried about, we haven't really seen completely, is what their traffic control and operations plan is. They were mentioning that they wanted to close off pedestrian access across Watkins for a significant period of time. And we're opposed to that because that's the primary access to the park.
Yeah.
And so we
And to school.
and to the school. And so we need to see what that operations plan looks like before we can approve it. It's understandable that for several phases of the operation that the area may need to be closed for limited periods of time. And it's our objective to minimize those closures and facilitate as much outreach as we can to the community with regards to those closures.
Okay. Any questions from the committee? Is the schedule still by end of the year? They're still on schedule?
They are obligated to complete it by December. Like I said, they have the contractors on board, and I think that they are fully intending to get it
Okay.
done on time.
The quad gates
Yes.
by the end of this year,
As promised.
That's promising.
come hell or high water. We may have high water when the
Um,
rain's coming.
And then the pedestrian crossing, you said they're gonna add a station, they're gonna add a light there at the,
Well, so part of the design includes pedestrian scale street lighting to
Okay.
highlight the crosswalk.
okay, so at that station lane crosswalk, they're gonna add some lighting, you said, or?
Not station lane, but of the track. So there's
Oh,
gonna be
that-
one,
oh,
there's
that
gonna be
crossing,
one
okay.
light on either side of the track on the south side of the crossing.
Okay,
Oh, okay, this is just light to see by. When you said it, I was thinking stoplight.
No, this is for pedestrians
Okay.
to see, so that pedestrians can see and be seen.
okay, okay. Any, Adrian has a public comment, so Adrian, if you could keep it to 3 minutes, thank you.
Sorry, thanks. Yeah, I completely agree with the sentiment of keeping it open for bikes and peds. I don't think it's acceptable to close it for any length of time, at least in prime time. If they absolutely have to, I would encourage staff to ask them to only do it at night or off peak for brief periods. But I don't see why it doesn't make sense to me with these projects that would have to be closed for any significant amount of time to bikes and peds. I wanted to bring to your attention something that a lot of people aren't aware of. So quad gates, what those are, you have them at Fair Oaks Lane. They completely close the crossing on both sides so that vehicles cannot drive around the lower gates. That's the rationale. Caltrain happily does not have a significant problem with what's called drive-arounds. I guess because people here know that there are enough trains running that they just don't do it wisely. So quad gates, I understand the rationale, but drive-arounds really aren't a big problem. The biggest problem, I sit on the CAC for Caltrain, and I'm speaking for myself here, but the biggest problem that Caltrain has, about 5 to 6 times a month, a vehicle drives off of a grade crossing and following an in-vehicle navigation system mistakenly drives onto the tracks thinking it's a turn, take the next left or the next right, and they turn onto the tracks. It happens almost exclusively after dark. And so this is why it's very important. I think I'm suggesting it to Caltrain staff to have good lighting such that nobody drives onto the tracks on purpose. And it's happened a number of times in Atherton. A couple times the vehicle caught on fire and scorched the front of the train. So it's a significant problem. So I just wanted to encourage staff to make sure that the lighting is good and that people cannot mistake the dark right of way at night for a road, because that's absolutely what's happening up and down the line 5 to 6 times a month. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brandt. Any other closing comments on this item? If not, we will move on to the Caltrain update number 5.
Thank you, Chair, and members of the committee. The update, there's limited update on actual construction activity in town with regards to the electrification project. There has been some work recently over the last couple of weeks to provide permanent power to the signal house that's adjacent to our corporation yard. And so that work is ongoing. They've had a temporary generator out there to keep power to that unit. And so with the hookup of permanent power, that generator will be going away.
Okay.
And so
Is that black plug that's coming from that building and leading to the other little building?
No, so this is located, it's actually hidden behind our corporation yard.
Oh, okay, okay.
And so we've just recently completed some screening fencing. And so you used to be able to see it from the town parking lot, but now it's hidden behind the
Okay,
fence.
I never
gate.
noticed it.
So that work is happening. The other thing I wanted to mention is Caltrain is working on a corridor-wide strategic plan related to grade separation. And so this, I don't know if you recall, might have been last year or a little bit further back, that there was a grand jury report that asked Caltrain to start looking more holistically, system-wide with regards to grade crossings. Currently, efforts are piecemeal and primarily driven by municipalities that are looking at grade separation. And that is, those initial efforts are funded by those jurisdictions. And there is a lot of coordination required with Caltrain to make sure that the design is done appropriately, that the environmental work is done right. But the main funding effort has been borne by the jurisdictions that are pushing those grade separations. The effort that is ongoing, I think it's going to complete hopefully by the end of the calendar year, will come up with various options on prioritization, on how to prioritize where money goes, which crossings need to be addressed first, as well as the impacts that to the neighboring crossings and neighboring jurisdictions. Trying to figure out whether or not there can be a more defined funding path and to define responsibilities, who would be responsible for driving which effort on those crossings or on those grade separations. And so that effort is ongoing. They've been looking at different programs, both within the state and outside the country in terms of how grade separations are looked at and funded. There is information that Caltrain has available online with regards to the study in further information.
Did you say they were going to complete that analysis by the end of the year?
By the end of the year is their target, yeah.
Maybe we'll schedule something for next year, next March, to take a look at that, just to see what they recommend for Atherton and such.
Well, like I said, it's not, I don't think that they're going specifically to what's happening where. It's more defining the pathway.
Oh, okay, okay. Well, we'll probably take a look nonetheless. Any questions or comments on the Caltrain update?
What is their source of funding for the overview of the whole system? What are they thinking?
Can you repeat funding for what? For doing it or for doing the
Where they
study?
look at it from a system basis rather than let each individual city.
Yeah, so the study is funded. And so they're working on the study. They are, as part of the study, they're going to be looking at where and how money can be derived for implementation. And so it's undefined at this point.
Who's funding the study?
Caltrain.
I think the idea is that as a whole, the corridor will have better luck seeking funding for all these grade separation projects instead of having it be Palo Alto versus Menlo Park, have everyone team up and ask for a huge chunk of money. Is specifically, I think, to try and get some of the infrastructure bill federal funding and being able to take advantage of those funds in addition to state funds is my understanding, because it's through the Caltrain local policymaker group is the group that's working on that.
Yeah, makes sense. That makes sense. Any other comments on this item? If not, we'll move on to the. Go ahead, John.
I guess the next one is high-speed rail, so maybe this all comes together.
Okay.
I mean, somebody must be taking some kind of long-term blue sky look at the amount of rail traffic on this line over the next 20 years. I mean, Caltrain talks about, oh, the riders are coming back. I watch empty trains go by my house day after day after day. And they have in fact cut the number of trains substantially to account for that. So now the downtime of the quad gates is less than it used to be, and how high-speed rail keeps stumbling from crisis to crisis. it would be nice to know what kind of future one is planning for. And I know that's asking for omniscience, but I mean, come on, people have projected stuff more complicated than this into the future.
Well, as I mentioned, I think the airlines, you need to look at what's happening. They're short 10,000 pilots. The airline prices and rates are going to double, in my view. And that's going to drive traffic to the rails just because of the economics of the cost of the airlines, because it's going to go up and up and up because of the lack of pilots.
Well, it may eventually drive it to the rails, but the first thing it's going to do, of course, is drive it to the highways.
Well,
And
Well, the highways, there's no room. I have five.
no, you're going to have more traffic. Come on, Greg. By the time they build enough trains to compensate for missing 10,000 pilots, there's going to be
so we
10
should-
years of
we should
cars
probably stay
sold.
on topic.
We call that long range planning.
Yeah, exactly. Is
So-
there some way we can participate in it?
High-speed rail lets you public comment. But I think that Caltrain and certainly high-speed rail have a certain vision of where they think it'll be. Whether that's realistic is another question in terms of the return of commuters and such, but
Well,
yeah.
through the chair, I'll
ahead.
just interject a couple of things. Pre-pandemic, the Caltrain developed their business plan with their long-range vision of how many trains and what it would take to provide, what kind of service levels. That all kind of went to the wayside with the pandemic. We are still well below pre-pandemic ridership at this point. High-speed rail is required by law to come up with a business plan every couple of years or to update their business plan every couple of years. And so that effort will be coming forward in the not too distant future. It's unknown at this time when Caltrain is going to be updating their business plan. And I think
I
we
want to make
have
a comment on
public
high-speed
comment.
rail.
Uh,
Let me ask the
What-
committee.
Why don't we move to the high-speed rail
Well,
Oh, I
topic?
thought we're on
I
high-speed.
think you have
rail.
a public
Oh,
comment.
go ahead, Adrian. And then we'll get the.
All right,
high-speed.
well, just briefly wanted to comment on that last point. Yes, staff is correct that there were some very detailed projections and work done prior to the pandemic. And all of that, as we know, has changed. No one could have predicted that pandemic, at least that I know. And asking for concrete predictions of what's going to happen 10 years from now, you can predict the stock market or anything else, then more power to you. But all transit agencies across the U.S. are facing that dilemma now of what's going to happen. Nobody really knows. Caltrain's recovery has been among the worst in the nation, simply because of the high percentage of its core ridership that is work from home eligible. Is a very tech-oriented ridership base, and San Francisco, as many of you probably have read in the news, is among the slowest, the worst recoveries of major cities downtowns, and that was part of Caltrain's major market. So ridership is currently at somewhat below 25% of pre-pandemic. It's coming back more strongly on weekends and different types of riders, not so much the daily home to office commute. BART, if you're interested, is at about 40% or a little bit below. So this is a problem all over the nation and here in the Bay Area because of the high ratio of choice commuters that can work from home, white collar workers that are able to just not commute anymore, or just a couple of days a week. So it's nobody knows for sure. That's just the situation we find ourselves in. They are facing, however, a fiscal cliff problem. They have not, in fact, cut back trains significantly. They're working on federal bailout funds that are slowly draining away, and they have a big seminar, a special session scheduled later this month. I think it's on the 29th, if I'm not mistaken, specifically to look at the financial future, and all agencies are doing this and having special board meetings to figure out what the future looks like and how to get through what they call the looming fiscal cliff. So, and Caltrain fortunately has a sales tax measure, so they're in better shape than others. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Brandt. So let's move on to the next item, the High-Speed Rail Authority update.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have much of an update. There were a few articles in the papers that were shared with the committee. I don't know if anybody attended any high-speed rail meetings
Sorry, I missed that. What did you just ask for?
Oh, we're moving on to the high-speed rail topic, that's all. Jim, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, my comment was, I used to own some property, some ranches over in the valley. And I want to know if anybody in this committee has driven Highway 99 and seen the quote massive construction, big abutments in the air with graffiti, no rail connections, just from one city to the other, dividing family dairy farms that have been together for 100 years and vineyards. It's a disaster in the valley, and all I can talk about is jobs, jobs, jobs. There is no train there. Trust me, there is no train there. Drive 99 and see for yourself. These huge concrete structures in the air and the billions of dollars that have been spent on this boondoggle. So that's my comment.
Okay. Any other
You know
comments?
me, I'm always low key.
Yeah. Feel free to say what's on your mind.
I really encourage you, drive over there. I'll tell you a joke. I can remember a cocktail party many years ago over in Lodi with our friends over there. And guys were just joking around saying, God, I can hardly wait to get in my pickup truck to Madeira and drive to the station and get the train to Bakersfield. Wouldn't that be great? And this is local ranchers and farmers over there that I've known for 50 years. I mean, that was the general feeling of that. And that's what exactly happened to those communities. They divided, but it was a big joke to the local people there. Who's gonna ride this? They're gonna get on an airplane and take a taxi, take an Uber over to Madeira to get on a train to ride to Bakersfield, to then doesn't stop in Bakersfield, short of Bakersfield, then get the Uber, then to take another Uber to Los Angeles. I mean, enough.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay,
Well, I just,
go ahead.
thank you, Alex. I just have one comment. The state has blown its wad on the last block of funding, last tranche of funding that they had. They've allocated it to the Central Valley. They'll finish up, those concrete structures. I don't think they'll put any rails on them. They certainly won't put any trains. There won't be any electrification, and there'll be no more money. End of the project.
We've hit a budget deficit in the state too.
Right.
Yeah.
But they're
Yeah.
not talking about transportation now, or getting people to and from, go down to Los Angeles for dinner. They're talking about job creation. Now, that's the big selling point on this thing for the valley is, we created 10,000 new jobs. Well, what?
Yeah, well,
That's
when
not what you told the people you were gonna do when you built this thing.
and when they spent the money, no more
No
jobs.
more job, no more money.
So
no more
We'll,
job.
we'll see high-speed rail between some point in the Central Valley, Antelope Valley, and Las Vegas before you see high-speed rail running up and down north and south in California.
I think they're building that right now.
Yeah, that's gonna happen.
So they're trying to,
Like Santa Clarita or somewhere around there.
someplace.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments on?
I feel like I ought to have some positive comment on high-speed rail. I don't know why, but I think in Europe where you see two routes that are 400 miles apart, Lyon to Paris and London to Paris, that people are commuting to work in the other cities. The Lyon people are working in Paris, the London people are working in Paris, Paris people are working in London. I mean, I went to London to Paris for lunch and came back and had dinner in London. So the speed and the availability of that working on the train while you're going 400 miles, both before work and after work, you get, people can't visualize people doing that because it's not available and it's never been available unless you go to Europe and ride those trains that distance. So you just build them and they will come. I think that's the answer.
I think what the US might be different from Europe is that we have freight, and freight has some rules about how the tracks can be used that have interfered with passenger rail, but that's probably off subject for this topic.
Well, I don't know. We'll see. We'll
Okay.
see.
So why don't we move on? Are there any future topics for meetings? Our next meeting is in June. Does anyone have anything they want to put on that agenda?
Well, I was just saying that I think we really should look at whether we should reopen the station because the traffic is so low now. If it's down to 40 to 25%, I mean, I think if they got 200 passengers a day out of Atherton, that would be, I don't know whether it's worth it for them to pay the $5 or $10 million to do the holdout station, but
Yeah, my only reluctance to put it on the agenda is that the council has already voted to have the station closed, so I'm not sure it's feasible to have a discussion to even try to reopen it. Maybe you might want to talk to council about your idea.
what does our council member think?
Maybe not within this, because this is not agendized,
Done.
so.
It's reopened. Let's do it. I don't know how the process works. It's been decided by the council in the past, and it was initiated by Caltrain, right? I mean, I don't,
Caltrain has always wanted to close that station, and the council agreed to it in exchange for some benefits that Caltrain provided. So that's already been, the deal's been done, so I'm not sure you can go
yeah,
back on
I
that.
don't know that we can.
Well, if Caltrain came to us and said, we'd like to get those 200 passengers just to get our number of people on the trains up, and we'll be glad to pay the holdouts the cost, then, that's a different story than what you're facing now, because you've agreed to have them build the Watkins in exchange for shutting the station down. So I understand they made a deal. But as we know, with one of our presidents making deals, you could break them as easy as you can make them. So
So we do have a public comment. So do we take public comment on future agenda?
Item now all of a sudden.
It's the future agenda
I
topics.
know we're talking about a future agenda item.
Yeah.
I'm totally opposed to considering even reopening a thing. When they closed it, nobody was riding it. They had a shuttle that was driving empty. Like John says, you got trains going by with
Okay.
3 people in them. I mean,
So if
What do
we
you-
could just
Yeah,
focus
we would
on whether or
function.
not it should be talked about.
Yeah. So it doesn't sound like we have a consensus on this, and it's probably something if you want.
well, we should have Caltrains. Well,
So,
I'll be
okay.
glad to withdraw it. I don't
Okay.
want to rock the boat. You know me, I'm a calm, collected guy. I don't like to rock the boat.
Thank you, Greg. Adrian has a comment on future agenda topics. So Adrian, you're the only thing holding us back from dinner. So
Okay, I'll try to be fast. Sorry.
thank you.
I just wanted to say there's no chance in hell that they're going to reopen your station. I'm afraid to tell you. They have been wanting to do that for as long as I can remember. They were looking at a $20 to $30 million cost to convert it to outside boarding so that the holdout rule was no longer applicable in Atherton. It's some technical stuff I won't go into, but what they are considering, and some advocates have pushed, because North Fair Oaks is a very transit dependent and unserved area, is building someday in the future a new station around Fifth Avenue where that underpass is. And that would also serve Atherton, as well as be convenient to the Stanford campus and Selby Lane part of Atherton, whatever. So that's what I wanted to add. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Any motion to adjourn?
But Alex, this is not a future agenda item at all. But given the death of Paul Jones,
Mhm.
and given his historic leadership and inspiration to this committee, seems to me we ought to say something to somebody. Should we be writing some kind of a testimonial to send to council and let them send it to his sons or his, I don't know, he has a
Well,
wife, but-
like I say, if you want to have that as a future agenda item, you certainly can. I do want to mention that the council at their, I think it was their last regular meeting, did have a moment of silence in his honor.
Maybe that's enough.
Again,
I had
so
a
moved.
motion, and do I have a second?
Sure.
Okay, all in favor?
All right.
Motion, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone. See you in 3 months,
June 6th.
June 6th, that's right.
Same time, same that Jim.
Is that?
You can stay for 2
Sorry.
hours if you want.